Ruth Ramsay, welcome to the Orgasmic Lifestyle Podcast, where every day is a climax. Thank you so much for taking part in this interview today. I was very excited to interview you because we've been following each other for a long time. And it's actually when I saw your TED talk that I had the idea that I would like to speak to you, but more about that a little bit later.
Mm.
So for those who are unfamiliar with your work, could you tell us what you do?
Well, I spend my working time and some of my non-working time helping people have better sex lives, which is an amazing thing to be doing. Very much feels like my purpose here on earth. So the way that that plays out work-wise is I'm an adult sex educator and coach. I run everything from 90-minute online webinars up to a 6-week course and then work with clients one-to-one as well. And I also teach a bit of striptease,
Oh,
which
wow.
relates back to my past. And then in a non-work sense, it's just the fact that when people hear what I do, they feel comfortable to talk to me about sex. So often I'm having informal discussions as well, which hopefully are helping people.
So what inspired you to follow this path?
Well, it all relates back to childhood, actually, when I had a fantasy of being a striptease artist.
Oh, how come? That's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Now, I can't pinpoint for sure where that came from. I know that from quite a young age, I was flicking through my mum and dad's Ian Fleming James Bond books, and there's some great striptease scenes in those. As a family, we were a fan of the Bond films, and you've got all the sexy dancing girls at the start. That was always my favourite part of a Bond film. And then my big sister was into heavy metal music. So when I was a little bit older, I was watching things like the music video to Motley Crue, Girls, Girls, Girls. My favorite film was Pretty Woman,
Mm.
which is sex work rather than striptease, but on that same kind of theme. I just felt incredibly drawn to that world. That was despite not having a boyfriend, never having been kissed till I was 18.
Mm.
So I had this fantasy of being a striptease artist, but at that point, I never dreamt that it would become a reality.
Mhm.
From there, it did become a reality. I had worked hard at school. I was the first person in my family to have graduated from university. There'd been a lot of pressure on me academically. And my dream, other than being a stripper, was to be a journalist and to write about sex. So
Mm.
I'd done a journalism degree, gone into financial journalism as the first job I could get, but then moved into fashion journalism and had my eyes set on the big women's magazines. But then I saw an advert for London School of Striptease. And yeah, and at the grand old age of 26, at which point I thought I'm far too old to be a striptease artist. But let's just go and explore this fantasy that I've had for so long. That then led to me becoming the first of the school students to go from beginner to actually working in the industry. That brought about 12 years of stripping, running events, activism around sex work, using my journalism skills, helping set up the first union in the UK for sex workers, also traveling around, running my own events, teaching striptease, modeling, all sorts of stuff for 12 years, which I absolutely loved every second of. Now, I left London to move in with my now husband, who lived out in the countryside in a house that he'd built with the two kids from his first marriage. Him coming to join me in London was not an option. So I hung up the high heels
Mhm.
and moved out and became a personal fitness trainer instead, because there's a lot of similarities being a PT and being a stripper, but was not happy, was not fulfilled. And so after an appropriate period of time, so when my stepkids were old enough to know, hey, Ruth used to be a stripper,
Mhm.
etc., I allowed myself to feel, okay, what do I need to feel fulfilled in life again? At that point, I didn't think going back into the kind of sexy space work wise would be a possibility because of age, geography, etc. But so many people had said to me, you'd make a great life coach. I thought, okay, let's check this out. Did a 9-month coaching diploma. And shortly after that, someone who had been on the diploma, so knew everything that I'd learned, that we had learned about coaching. She also knew my history with striptease. She came to me and said, "Would you coach me about my sex life?" She said, I can't even talk to my partner about sex, let alone friends. I feel very shy and inhibited around it. But because of your past, I know you won't be shocked. You won't judge me. You won't slut shame me. I think I could talk to you. Can you put together what we've just learned on this coaching diploma with that life experience? She didn't phrase it quite like this, but this is how it added up in my head. Would you coach me around sex? And that's when I had the amazing realization that this was how I was to continue what I now recognize to be my life's work, which is helping people have better sex lives.
Amazing. So everything's kind of connected in this way. It probably didn't seem like that at the time, like I'm assuming. So how did then the stripping, how did it meet with your expectations? Because you must have had these expectations from the fantasy. What's the difference between the fantasy and the reality?
Um, Interesting. I've never been asked that question before. I would say reality surpassed the fantasy because it continued for so long. I'd had this fantasy of being a striptease artist, but I'd never thought beyond imagining one night at a strip club, for example. And if someone had said to me, actually, this is something that you'll do full time for over a decade and
Wow.
that you will absolutely love, I couldn't have imagined that. If someone had said to me, you will become a stripper one day, I would have imagined in between jobs 6 months at a strip club or something. So in that sense, the reality definitely surpassed the fantasy.
And did you find that other people, your peers, were they as passionate about it? Because I have this assumption, maybe I'm wrong here, that people are getting into this space because of they think of they're getting easy money.
Mm.
That could just be for the financial rewards and not really because they really want to be a stripper. What was your experience of that?
Well, before I answer, I should note that
Mm,
when I went into the industry, it was around 2002.
mm,
So it was very different to how it is now. It was
mm,
not being promoted as anything glamorous, certainly not any kind of career choice. Now we have, obviously on social media, etc., girls and people of all genders are going into it thinking it's going to be glamorous, sexy, I'm going to make loads of money. Um, it wasn't quite the same back then because it was so much more underground. And I think to go into it, you had to either feel genuinely passionately drawn towards it, or you already knew someone who was doing it. That was a route in for lots of performers to already know someone and know the realities of it. Or you were short on options and desperately needed some quick money. But I would say, on reflection, it's like any other work. You could go into a TV studio and find a percentage of people who love their work, are passionate about it, and feel this is where they're meant to be. A big middle proportion of people who are like, well, I had the skills, I need a job, I enjoy it. There's good sides, bad sides, but I'd move on if my actual life stream were proposed to me. And then you'll have a proportion of people who say, oh, I'd give this up tomorrow. I hate it, but it's work and I need the money. So certainly there were plenty of people like me who absolutely loved it.
amazing. And you said some of the similarities between a personal trainer and a stripper. Could you highlight
Mm,
those for
mm.
us?
Well, something that I loved about striptease and about personal training and about coaching now is that I like to get kind of to the point. I like to get to the deep nitty gritty of stuff with people. I don't particularly like surface level small talk. As a striptease artist, you are naked on a stage in front of someone, maybe within 60 seconds of meeting them, or maybe you're in a lap dance booth with them within 5 minutes of meeting them. And it's about creating a comfort level and a safe space very, very quickly with someone. As a personal trainer, you meet someone, maybe they've been into the gym for a 15-minute chat beforehand, but then once you start the session, you are in what I consider to be an intimate space with them quickly. They're vulnerable, they're
Mm,
sweating in front of you. And as a coach, very, very quickly, particularly with my topic,
Mm.
within 3 minutes of starting to speak to someone, they might be telling me things that they've never told me before. So it's that instant intimacy, and the requirement for me to create a safe, held space very quickly. That's what I enjoy.
hmm that resonates with me a lot of the because people always assume, or they ask me questions like how do people react to your work, and for me,
Mm,
people assume there's lots of judgment, which there probably is a little bit, but what the biggest gift is the people who don't know me, they just open up. Isn't that incredible? I mean, I'm sure you
mm,
like experience people who tell you who tell you things they've never told their best friend or their partner,
yeah,
and they perceive you as an open-minded, non-judgmental person. That's such a gift. Has that been your experience as well?
absolutely. Yes. The number of times I've heard, I've never told anybody this, dot, dot, dot. I'm sure it's the same for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
amazing. So tell us about your TED Talks. I watched your TED Talk a few months ago and I absolutely loved it. The title was very attention grabbing. Could you tell us about
Mhm.
that?
So the title is Revamp Your Sex Life in 6 Minutes.
Mm-hmm.
When we were crafting the title, I was adamant that in 6 minutes needed to be in there
Mm-hmm.
because we know from research that people have shorter and shorter and shorter attention spans. People are busy. I found myself, as I was watching hundreds of TED Talks in my preparation for mine, that if a talk was over a certain amount of time, I thought, oh, I haven't got time to watch that. But the shorter talks get more views. So I wanted to get in 6 minutes in there. Actually, as we record this today, it's the 1 year anniversary of the talk going live on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
And as of yesterday, it has 2.5 million views.
Amazing.
Yeah, mind blowing. I always wanted, right from the start of the coaching, um, to have an impact on as many people's lives as possible, a positive impact, obviously. When I was working with a business coach at the start, it was a case of no, 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 you need to target single, high income, high investment clients. That's the way you build the business. Do that first. Um, but I've always felt very, very passionately that I didn't want people's financial status to impact whether they could benefit from my work. So I'd imagined maybe one day I'll write a book priced at $9.99 or whatever it might be. But the TEDx talk obviously has just fulfilled that dream for me on a scale that I literally never could have even fantasized about.
Tell us about the actual contents of the talk then, the message.
Mm, mm. Well, when I had the opportunity to pitch to do a talk, I thought back over all of the feedback I've had from people who've done my 8 week course, feedback I've had from one to one clients, and things that I have seen as I've been talking to people about sex. What is it that has had that biggest instant light bulb moment for the people I'm speaking to? What is it that people have said to me afterwards? Oh, out of everything on the Passionate program, which is my course, this was the biggest thing. And the idea of treating sex as a hobby
Mm.
was that number one thing. And with TED and TEDx, the strapline is ideas worth sharing. So it needed to be something very easily and quickly understandable, but then also could easily be shared with other people. The idea of treating sex as a hobby carries with it so many kind of meanings and actions that we can take. So I explain in the talk that we want to, how we would address a hobby. First of all, we'd make time for it.
So,
So in the talk,
so we actually schedule? Should we
yeah,
schedule
yeah.
stuff? Yeah.
So in the talk, I compare sex to tennis.
Okay.
One of the reasons I chose tennis is apparently it's the same word in every language.
Mm-hmm.
And anybody who hears that word can picture what I mean. So a more accurate metaphor might have been some kind of partner dancing, for example, but not everybody hearing or watching the talk could necessarily picture it, whereas tennis, everyone can picture. So I explain if we wanted to get better at tennis, the first thing we would do would be schedule time for it. We would educate ourselves about it. If we already felt we were experts, we would still seek to keep learning. We would look for inspiration. We might buy specialist equipment. If there was a physical problem which impacted whether we could play, we would not hesitate to seek medical advice. And crucially, we would talk about it with people. And if we view sex, but for sex, we kind of do the opposite. We don't talk about it. We don't schedule it because we believe the myth that it must be spontaneous. We don't seek to learn about it. It should be natural. So often I speak to people who've got some kind of physical problem or worry that's impacting their sex lives, but they're too embarrassed to go to a doctor, etc., etc. So if instead we treat sex as a hobby and we do make time for it, we do talk about it, we seek to learn about it. If there's a problem, we address that. If we treat it in that way, we have more and better sex, which is fundamentally what people want. Then towards the end of the talk, I make the point that if we treat it as a hobby, it opens the door to recognition that everybody should have a right to it. It opens the door to diversity. There's all sorts of other ramifications of thinking of it as a hobby.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was really interesting. And something that surprised me in my work is the lack of curiosity about it, because it's such an important part of life. And there's so many resources online, but people just want to they kind of ignore that. And I think I interviewed someone once, I can't remember who it was. They talked about how most sexual encounters happen when people are drunk. And that can really impair, it can really affect, how confident you feel. And yeah, people don't really talk about these issues. They'd rather talk to, Google things or speak about friends or even just cross their fingers. It's really curious because it's the foundation of life. Like our personal life decisions are made based on sexuality and attraction and things like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
I think it's the message that if sex is right, if we're with the right person, particularly, if you're in love with someone, it should be easy and natural. We shouldn't need to speak about it. Desire should arise spontaneously. I think that's why that holds people back from seeking to actively learn about it and talk about it. And therefore, if things aren't good, they think something must be wrong with me or something's wrong in my dynamic with my partner. Yeah. Whereas, as you know, if we do actually get curious and learn, then that has a massive impact.
Yeah, I was brought up in a Catholic school, so my sex education was 1 hour. That was but I was fortunately I resort More Magazine. Do you remember More Magazine?
Absolutely. I loved More Magazine, Position of the Fortnight.
Smart
Yeah.
girls get more. That was my sex education. I was so curious, and I was always wanting to learn. Well, it started off with Just 17, and then it was More Magazine, and Just 17 was a bit more innocent. They had this, I remember they had these free guides. One was a kissing guide, all these different kisses, like going into someone, then it's like fluttering your eye, the butterfly kiss. And I remember my mum found them and just went mad. And I was about 14, just 17. And then, but More Magazine was incredible. And I'm so great. That's something that inspired me. I was so grateful for all those writers who spoke about sex in such a, such an open way. And it got to a point where I got to top shelf. I think they changed the position of it in some news agents. Quite literally.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I was always curious about how my peer group didn't have that curiosity, about wanting to learn about this thing called sex and just kind of, yeah, it's really interesting. Something you said earlier as well about the assumptions about sex and age. That's something that I've learned as well. People assume that once you get past a certain age, there's no more sex, but it's really inspiring to learn about the midlife category is growing more and more in terms of awareness, especially with post divorce, and women are really prioritizing pleasure throughout life.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's something that I'm seeing very much with the midlife women who come to me. I think all of the publicity over the last few years, at least in the UK, about menopause has massively helped, because that's made one of the two taboo topics. So sex is a taboo topic, menopause was a taboo topic. So women in the perimenopausal and menopausal journey having problems with sex had that kind of double taboo whammy. Whereas now it's more acceptable to talk about perimenopause and menopause. Now the words vaginal dryness, etc., aren't filled with such shock and horror. Now women can talk about that, and people with uteruses, we can now address sex at that life stage more positively. And I found that there is an appetite for that. So thanks to the TEDx talk, I managed to pitch and write an article for The Eye, which is one of the big newspapers here in the UK. And then off the back of that, I pitched them an article about the positive aspects of sex in menopause. And they said, yes, please. And they printed it as a double-page article.
Mm.
And I've seen similar appearing elsewhere in the press. And I think if we can bring positivity to the topic and say there are all of these good things and great opportunities at this stage, then people feel much better about talking about it.
Definitely. Awareness is everything. And go
Mm.
back to your TED talk and similarities. Did you find that being on stage, did your striptease experience help you at being on stage? Because you're very confident in that talk.
Yeah, I had assumed it would help me possibly more than it did.
Oh, okay.
Um, and I mean, I hadn't ever spoken on stage
Really?
until,
Oh,
yeah. So the TEDx, and it was TEDx, not TED, so it was an independently organized TED, hence TEDx. That was in March, and the first talk I ever gave had been in January of the same year.
wow.
Yeah. And I had not been nervous about that because I had thought I have stepped onto a stage in front of people tens of thousands of times. This is fine. Um, and I'd done recorded for lots of podcasts. I'd done lots of online presentations and it was fine. And then in the ladies' toilets in the break in the January event, which was the sex lectures up in Manchester, I was first after the break and I was in the toilets and I'm suddenly struck with horrendous stage fright that kind of came out of nowhere. And I'm so glad I had that experience, or that might have been me walking onto the TEDx stage. And I was talking about it afterwards with a friend who was a very experienced public speaker. And she said, Ruth, how would you expect me to feel if I had to go onto a stage and take all my clothes off? And I,
Mm.
having never done it before, and I was like, well, you'd be terrified. She's like, what you're doing is that in reverse.
Mm.
Public speaking and stripping, totally different things. So that very much encouraged me to practice the TEDx talk. I think I probably rehearsed it over, well, I definitely rehearsed it over 100 times if I think about my own personal rehearsals, but I rehearsed it in front of friends on Zoom, neighbours, local shopkeepers. I borrowed someone's dog to take the dog for walks and recite it to the dog. Probably most terrifying of all, I recited it to my parents and sister.
Wow.
Anything where I thought I don't want to practice it in front of that person, that terrifies me, I actively went and made that happen in order to feel as confident as I could. So I'm sure that to some degree, the striptease experience, I mean, even just the practicalities of before you walk onto any stage, you look at it and you look for even the tiniest trip hazards, for
Mm.
example. I knew that when you're on stage, the lights are such that you can't really see people. So I'm sure the experience did play into it, but nowhere near as much as I had expected it to.
So you couldn't imagine everyone naked then, as people say, no, together. You can't see anything
No,
in all those
I
lights.
no, I didn't do that. My husband was in the audience, but we'd agreed that he would that we wouldn't discuss where he was sitting
Oh, okay, that's good.
because, and we also agreed that I wouldn't look for him in
Mm.
the audience because that could have
Mm.
distracted me as well. And actually, I now know where he was sitting was the perfect place, such that the lights dazzling me, I couldn't see him because that would have been distracting.
Yeah, some of your posts on Instagram with your husband really inspire me because I'm a romantic. Do you have any
Mm.
tips about passion, keeping the passion alive and the love and romance?
Well, I think fundamentally you want an honest and evolving connection with
Mm.
that person. When we were getting together, there was a lot at stake. I was in my mid to late 30s. He was in his late 40s. Um, for me to get together with him, I had to leave London,
Mhm.
and I'd been there for nearly 20 years, and I was in no way ready to leave London, and it meant leaving striptease as well. Now, there were other things going on. The industry was changing a lot. There was a lot of stuff happening that I didn't like. So it wasn't that I was in the middle of my glory years as a stripper and I gave it all up. There were other reasons to leave, but I wasn't ready to leave yet. Definitely not. And if I'd stayed in London, there would have been many, many opportunities that would have come kind of along with having been stripping so long. So running my own events, teaching more, etc. So I was giving up all of that, and I was becoming a stepmom to early teens when I had never wanted kids and never imagined having young kids in my life. So there was a lot at stake for me. From the flip side, for my husband, he was getting together with a aging mid to late 30s stripper. Friends and family saying to him, well, is she a gold digger? He was, but much more importantly than that, he was looking at bringing me into the lives of his children. And for me, the biggest compliment I've had in my entire life is him being up for bringing me into his children's lives. So for both of us, there was so much at stake. We sat down and had a very honest conversation about everything that had gone wrong in previous relationships, because we thought, basically, am I allowed to swear on this?
Yeah, yes.
I was like, we can't fuck this up. There's too much at stake. And one of the things that we decided as a result of that was an absolute honesty policy. No big lies, obviously, but no small white lies, nothing. We would be absolutely honest about everything, however difficult that was. And I would have said I was a very honest person. But in the early months of that, I was realizing the degree to which I was in the habit of telling tiny white lies that just kind of help smooth life along.
Or maybe thinking that something wasn't important, so you didn't raise it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the other thing we did in that regard, because I'd said to him, my pattern with past relationships, and I'd had 4 relationships before him, is that if something has upset me or annoyed me, I don't raise it. I just keep quiet about it. And then typically about 2.5 years in, and also I'll go, oh, let me do that for you. I'll do that for you. I'll do that for you. I'll do that for you. And after about 2 years, I go, why the fuck am I doing everything? Oh, and by the way, this thing 6 months ago and this thing 9 months ago. And it was not nice to admit that. As I say, it was a conversation where we got like really ugly with each other. But we decided from that, or my husband's idea, he said, every month, let's have a kind of relationship MOT where it's a chance to raise all of these things. And together we came up with a list of questions, including things like hygiene, for example, finances, how much time we were having together. But then we built in positive things as well. So what from the last month has actually meant the most positively? And we just learned so much. So it might have been, maybe it was my birthday month, but reflecting on it, what meant the most wasn't the wonderful gift he'd got me and all the fuss he'd made. It was when he'd realized that I was having a difficult phone conversation with someone and he just sat next to me and held my hand. And so we had this kind of monthly meeting, which trained us in both how to deal with negatives and also what we most needed as positives. And crucially, it gave me the chance once a month to say, this thing that happened 2 weeks ago that was seemingly meaningless, actually, it's hurting me. And it gave him that chance as well. And I would say those 2 things, the honesty policy and the relationship MOTs, are what gave us the foundation, coming back to your question, that our sexual life together now still thrives off. So absolute honesty, basically.
Amazing. And also, so I can see a pattern with the scheduling then. So the kind of scheduling, the kind of relationship check-in plus intimacy as well. Yeah, I think that's a really good thing to do, especially with checking in, because sometimes, resentment can kind of build over time if you're not really.
And if it was something which at the time seemed small, my pattern would be, I'm not, oh, that's hurt me, but it's a silly thing. I'm not going to mention that. And then a week later, wow, that still hurts. But if I say something about it now, it'll be like, what was the big deal? That little thing. And then a month later, it's still hurting. You'll think, wow, I definitely can't mention it now because what I'm feeling is not in proportion to the fact it was a tiny thing. And
Mm.
then all of that adds up. And the metaphor or the visual picture I have in mind for some reason is like a very dry bucket with like a bit of dust and straw in the bottom of it and a tap above it. And
Mm.
each lie, even the
Oh, yeah.
tiniest white lie, is a drop in that bucket.
Mm.
And before you know it, that bucket is overflowing. And so I told myself, I am keeping that bucket dry because
Mm.
even just one little drop is the start of what will become a full bucket. And I'm not prepared to allow that to happen to this relationship.
So if you had like, let's say one drop, would you say it in the moment or would you wait for the monthly MOT?
Nowadays, I would say it in the moment. So we don't
Mm.
do the monthly MOTs now, 14 years on.
Mm.
Every so often we do sit down and have one. But the first couple of years of doing that basically trained us to always be honest.
Mm.
So I'm quite a slow processor. Sometimes I'll know something's not right, but I won't be able to put my finger on what it is.
Mm.
So what I'll then say is maybe I'm feeling a bit weird this evening. I feel that something's not quite right. Something's bothering me, but I don't know what it is yet. But as soon as I do know, I will tell you.
Mm.
And then once it's unraveled, so maybe an evening, 2 evenings later, I might go, oh, when you said that thing or when you reacted in this way to that, I think that's what had made me feel how I was feeling. So basically, we're sharing all the time, honestly, um, what emotional state we're in, even if we can't give an explanation for that straight away.
Great. Amazing. So what's the best thing about working in the sexual wellness space for you?
Um, Getting DMs, emails, feedback from people saying, I'm now having an amazing sexual life,
Hmm.
thanks to whether it's coaching, whether it's seeing the TEDx talk, something on social media. That's the best thing. But then the longer I've been in this space, which is 4 years now, um, in some ways, what means more to me is in when someone says, learning through you in whatever form, I'm now having the best sex I've ever had. I couldn't have dreamt of this. But also, my partner and I are so much closer. We're talking to our kids
Mm.
about sex in a way we never could before. So, someone who I've been coaching recently, whose eldest is 17 or has just turned 18 now, sex was a taboo topic in the household. And they've got younger siblings as well. Because for this client, their parents never, ever, ever talked about sex with them. But through working with me, they've become much, much more confident, much more knowledgeable, and they've seen the benefits of being open about this. And so they've now been able to sit down with their spouse and talk to their children about it. And particularly their 17-year-old, now 18, has
Mm.
just embarked on their first relationship, which is becoming sexual. And so this client has said to me the fact that he has actually come to me to talk about these things. And she said 6 months ago, before I'd started working with you, I know he couldn't have done that because we'd never talked about sex with him. So it's the impact that this is having on families and on people's wider lives overall. That's the best thing about it.
It's also very encouraging, isn't it? Just to carry on when you've got these when you get
Absolutely.
back from people. And what about the worst thing?
Absolutely. Oh, I think the worst thing generally um, is in terms of entrepreneurship, and I'm sure you will know, is the roller coaster,
Mhm.
the highs and the lows, and the just keeping faith and keeping on and keeping on and keeping on. Then within that, trying to keep some semblance of work-life balance and not be working till 10 p.m.
Mhm.
every evening. That's a challenge. I think specifically with the topic of sex, the hardest thing is the haters, basically. Most of the time I'm existing within this very sex positive bubble, and then every so often there'll be something that reminds me that I'm in the minority in feeling like this, something that reminds me what the state of most of the society that I live in terms of sex, and then it's hard not to get discouraged.
I think those things are maybe applied to all sectors. I mean, the haters, I mean, is something that everyone has to deal with at some point.
Mm,
In any type of topic that we talk about. And but I have a very different idea about how to approach that. I think haters are a sign of success, and then sometimes those
mm,
those comments they inspire more new content than
mm.
the positive comments sometimes, because then you can
Yeah,
gives you an opportunity to kind of explain a bit more about addressing that whatever their point.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think for me, it's not the impact on me personally.
Mm,
So if someone says something awful, um, it's not that it hurts me because I've got an incredibly thick skin.
mm.
I mean, when you were a
Have
stripper
to,
for
yeah.
12 years, yeah. But it's the reminder some people still think like this.
Mm.
That's what upsets me.
Mm. That's why there's work to do then. There's a lot of work to do.
Yes, yeah.
Definitely. I think for me, one something that I've found is when I was a student, I was a waitress, and that's to get some extra money. But I always
Mm.
promised myself I'm never going to work in a pizza place because I don't want to ruin pizza. And I do think sometimes my sex life, not now, but like in previous eras, that it was probably better before I became a sexual wellness content creator, because I had many long droughts periods, and I'm writing about sex all day, and I'm like not having it for 6 months because I found it more challenging to meet people who weren't intimidated. I mean, you
Mm.
find that in your previous life before your husband, it was like harder to. Sometimes people are like very
I think it was hard to find people who were up for seeing the real me,
yeah, exactly, yeah.
because everyone assumed I was this 24/7 sex
Yeah.
vixen, oh, she's a stripper.
Yeah,
And the challenge when you're in that world is finding someone who's happy to see you slobbing on the sofa in a tracksuit.
exactly. For me, I'd say the same,
Yeah,
like hoodie and no makeup. That's the real me, and
yeah,
someone can
yeah.
see through the facade or the kind of social media, what people see of you on social media, and just to realize it's a
Mm,
message. It's also a job like any other, to be honest.
mm, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So what are you working on at the moment? You have a new course, is that correct? Tell us about your
Um,
course.
well, I don't have a new course,
Hmm.
but my course is evolving. So
Okay.
when I started out, I thought, right, I'm going to be a sex coach.
Hmm.
But then what I discovered so quickly, which I'm sure you will have done as well, was the extent of the lack of education that people had. So one of the many jobs I had when I was in the sort of stripping sexy world was reviewing books and toys and films and all sorts. And I'd read um, several of the kind of early self-help and instructional sex books, such as Dr. Ian Kerner, She Comes First. So I reviewed that when it came out, which I'm guessing now, but I would say was around 2008. And that taught me about my own anatomy. Until that point, I thought I took too long to orgasm. I read that book and realized that I was normal. So that and other things that I'd read, I was clued up around these things. But then when I started coaching, I would be, for example, coaching a couple where she wanted to experience more pleasure in bed. And I would gradually realize she actually doesn't know the structure of the clitoris. Well, they don't know the structure of the clitoris. And I kept finding that clients needed education before they could be ready for coaching.
Mm,
The other thing that I had vastly underestimated, coming from the background I did, was how difficult people find it to talk about sex.
mm,
So what I then found I did, partly also thanks to an amazing year-long business mastermind I was on, was I thought, right, let's put together an educational course, but that also has the opportunity within it for people to take what they're learning, apply it to themselves, and create action steps. I kind of call it guided self-coaching. I
mm,
wanted to go one step beyond, listen to this,
mm,
okay, now we're done. So I created the first version of the Passionate program, seeking to combine those things, the education and the time and space during the workshops, not afterwards as homework, because people don't necessarily get round to it, but during the workshops to say, okay, I've learned this, I've heard these examples. Now, how does this apply to me in my unique life? And so that course has been running now for, we're in the 4th year.
Wow.
And it's about to become an instantly available course. So I've always run it in cohorts. I've run it 3 times a year. But literally one of the tasks this week, as we're recording this, is we're in the process of making it instant access so that somebody who wants and needs it can have it straight away. So certainly by the time this is broadcast, anybody who thinks I need this can go online and start straight away.
Amazing. There's a big industry now on online courses, so it's great to
Mm,
take advantage,
mm,
especially with a topic like we don't have enough education on it. So huge opportunity.
absolutely. Yeah.
A couple of questions I ask all of my guests. What is the book that changed your life?
Um, I think for me, it was, let me think, this was before the sex coaching. I went to Mind Body Spirit show at Olympia in
Oh, I've heard of
London.
that. Is it really good? I've seen it on Instagram. Mm.
Um, Personally, I've not particularly enjoyed the show. I've been there that one time as a member of the public, and I've also been there as a speaker. And it's not for me. Some people love it and it's for them. It's not for me. But that first time that I went, I'd been invited, actually. I remember now. The reason I went was I was working as a personal trainer, and I had a friend who'd launched a yoga leggings brand, and she had a stand at Mind Body Spirit. And she said, I'll give you a free pass to come along. And I'd had a look around everything. There was nothing particularly that I wanted to buy or get involved in. But in the center of the show, they have a big bookshop, sort of open plan bookshop. And I thought, right, I am going to buy myself a book. I'm not going to leave here open handed. And I spotted Gabby Bernstein, The Universe Has Your Back.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I'd never read anything like that before. I didn't have any particular religious or spiritual faith. It wasn't something I'd thought about since I was in my early teens. But the back of the book sounded intriguing, and it was quite a lightweight, small book. I thought, I'll give this a go. And that definitely changed my life. I wouldn't say that it gave me any kind of specific spiritual faith that has endured, but it did it did teach me a faith that there is something bigger than this, and that there is a path, that there is more than just us, that there is a path. But the most important thing was mindset wise. So around that exact time, we were moving house. We'd had a big business failure with the first business my husband and I had together. We basically lost everything and we had to sell the family home. But I had seen a house that I'd fallen instantly in love with, that just felt so right, that was available to buy straight away. In order to secure that house, our house wasn't even on the market yet, and it was a very risky house to sell. In order to secure the place I'd fallen in love with, we had to take out a bridging loan. So we had to borrow the money to buy that one before we'd sold the original one. And it was £2,000 interest a month. So the pressure was on. Now, prior to reading the book, I was the kind of person who would have imagined worst case scenarios, stress, very much a worst case scenario kind of person in some ways. But because of the book, I thought, no, I believe that this is the right path. I saw that new house, which is the one I'm speaking to you from now, and I knew this is meant to be. I'm choosing to have faith in the universe that this is a path and it will all work out. And I was totally relaxed. The very, very few people we told about the bridging loan and the interest were freaking out on our behalf. Oh my God, what if you don't sell? That house is going to be so difficult to sell. What if no one comes along? And I was just serene. And we did sell. In 6 months, we sold. And I could have spent those 6 months tearing my hair out and not sleeping for fear of what if we didn't sell. As it was an easy, joyful 6 months. And that was a major personality shift in me that has endured. So I don't always manage to have that, but I do try and step back and have perspective, believe that this is part of a bigger path, that I don't necessarily know. I cannot see right now what is in the higher good for me. And just basically to chill the fuck out a bit and trust that it's all okay. And
That's
that all
amazing.
started with that book.
I think I might
Yeah.
add that to my list. It sounds good. And what about the quote or affirmation that you live by? Do you have a phrase that
Well,
you live
I knew you were going to ask me this
by?
one. And the one that kept coming to mind is actually related to my business, but it's become bigger than that. So back when I was starting out with the sex coaching, I read something which I think maybe was Tony Robbins, which said when you're starting a business, you will overestimate what you can achieve in the first year,
Mhm.
but you'll underestimate what you can achieve in the first 5 years. And I very, very much took that to heart, and setting goals and things for the business in terms of how long things would take. And that, like, not feeling frustrated when things weren't happening quickly. I just kept thinking, just breathe, think about the 5 years, not the 1 year.
Mm.
Um, and for me, 5 years will be, it's about 10 months away. It's late winter next year is my 5 year point. And if someone had said to me after 1 year, 4 years from now, you'll have a TEDx talk with 2.5 million views, I certainly couldn't have imagined that. And I try to kind of apply that to other things in life as well now. Things take longer than we think.
Mm.
Just so combine those two things, have a longer view and chill out and believe that it will happen. Put the work in, obviously, but things will happen when they're meant to, and when they're meant to will be on a longer time frame than what you initially expect.
Definitely, that's a great advice. And so where can people find you?
My website is ruthramsay.com.
Mhm.
Ramsay is spelt with AY at the
Okay.
end. That's something that catches people out.
Yeah.
ruthramsay.com. Um,
Yeah.
and then you can find all my other links, a link to the TED Talk, etc., on there. As we're recording this, I have an Instagram, but as you'll know, with anyone in the sex education type space, that's always under threat. But I'm Ruth Ramsay _ on Instagram. And without wanting to make myself spend even more time on there,
Mhm.
I love getting DMs. I love hearing people's stories, people's experiences. And yeah, never hesitate to drop me a DM on there.
Amazing. So thank you so much for joining us today on the Orgasmic Lifestyle podcast. It's been a real pleasure.
It has been fantastic. Thank you.